I was rebuilding the health department in the city of Detroit. And I was hired to rebuild it after it had been shut down when the city was facing bankruptcy and emergency management. They made the decision to shut down a 185-year-old health department in a city with a higher infant mortality rate than my father's native Egypt. A city where our children face threefold the probability of being hospitalized for asthma, fourfold the probability of being exposed to lead than the state average. They shut down their 185-year-old health department. My job was to rebuild that department. We were doing things like making sure every kid had access to a free pair of glasses delivered at school, standing up to some of the biggest corporate polluters in the entire state in a city racked by asthma. You know, if a kid has mild persistent asthma, their probability of missing a day of school is 1 every 2 weeks. And it's not because they're playing hooky. It's because they wake up and they cannot breathe. And there's a high probability that instead of going to school in a bus, they're going to wind up in a hospital via an ambulance. That's the reality for those kids. And after Flint, we made sure our kids were safe in the single place where we systematically concentrate them most of the day, most of the year, by having every school, daycare, and Head Start tested for lead in the water. Now, every project that I would take on in that role, every single one, led to the door of some politician or another. And the fact of the matter is that those doors don't open up when you are lobbying for a child. They always open up when you are lobbying for a corporation and you've brought that corporate PAC check. I watched the Flint water crisis up close and personal. I watched our state and its malfeasance because of a complete disregard for the basic norms and structures of a democracy because of emergency management make the decision to save a couple of pennies a day and poison 10,000 children, 100,000 people overall. And we all know the story of Flint does not start when they changed the water source. That is not when the city of Flint first started careening down that path. It started when the city and the state made a decision to build a one industry, one company town, right? Flint was the automotive capital of the world. It was Buick City. And when they built the entire economics of that city around that industry and around that company, they took a bet on that company, except for the company didn't take a bet on the city. Over time, what happened is that it started to grow. People came for jobs. A big proportion of those folks who came for jobs came from the South during the Great Migration. They were black and poor. And when they came, they didn't get the same jobs as everyone else. They didn't get access to the same housing as everyone else. They were relegated to the worst jobs, the ones that would be lost the most quickly, and relegated to the least desirable parts of town because of a policy of redlining, a policy underwritten by the United States federal government. And then when the fact that GM hadn't bet the same way on Flint came to rise, because of automation, because of offshoring, those jobs started to leave. Who lost their job first? Black folks in the least desirable parts of town. And then what happens is because people who got to leave left, what we call white flight of the 50s and 60s, the people who were left over in Flint tended to be those poor, first to lose their jobs in the least desirable parts of town. And when they inevitably couldn't bear the tax burden of a city and an infrastructure built for a much larger group of people, the city took away their right to democratic self-determination, calling them profligate. Governor Snyder passed a law, an emergency manager law, that would allow his administration to appoint one person to oversee the work of all of city government. And when the people of the state of Michigan came together to repeal that law, they passed it again, and this time put a rider on it so that it couldn't be repealed. They passed an appropriation alongside with it. And then, when that emergency manager realized that he could save a couple of pennies every day, they decided to switch the water without putting corrosion controls on the water. And at that point, that's when the mismanaged infrastructure of Flint met the Flint River water. Water whose pH is far lower than most of what we drink. A water that everybody knew wasn't potable. And ultimately, it corroded the algae that had grown on the inside of those leaded pipes, corroded the pipes themselves right from those pipes into the arteries of young children, into their brains. That's what happened in Flint. It did not start just when they changed the water.